Hey guys, yours truly, Kevin Grace, reporting to you from Mount Carmel Catholic Cemetery here in Illinois. I'm in the Oak Park area, and behind me is famous mobster Sam Giancana. He's buried in this crypt inside here. He was part of the Chicago outfit from 1957 until he was imprisoned in 1966, and he was one of the mobsters that the Kennedy family went after. And also, you'll remember there's some pictures of him dating Marilyn Monroe, so definitely interesting person. And in June 1975, he was killed at home by an unknown assailant. So had to be somebody he knew, because he was cooking dinner, so he let him in to his home, and somehow or another he was killed. But anyway, he's buried here, and it's easy to find. This church, this cemetery will not give you a map or tell you where folks are buried here, but right here on the corner of section 38 is the crypt for the Giancana family. And if you come inside here, you can see that his crypt is right here on the left hand side there, and you can see that it says Sam on it. I'll try to zoom in as well as I can, but there's a glare, but that's where he's laid to rest, right inside here. And you can see this beautiful window right there, but this is the inside of the crypt. But if you like this video, make sure you click the like button down below, and feel free to leave any messages about Sam Giancana.
50 years ago, the Chicago mob was much more powerful than it is today. And then something happened to attract attention around the world. I'm Chuck Gowdy, NBC5 Investigates. This is a story of murder and mayhem, and one of the most powerful men in the Chicago area and coast to coast in 1975, Sam Giancana. I'm going to walk you through what happened to Sam Giancana on a day in June 1975 that changed the complexion of the Chicago mob and has law enforcement still scratching their heads. Sam Giancana had just arrived at his Oak Park home from the hospital. He had a minor medical procedure and invited some friends over and his daughter to celebrate his health. There were 2 FBI agents parked in front of Giancana's house that night. It was a house, but Giancana was actually living in the basement. He had an apartment down there, while his caretakers were living on the first floor with their children. Giancana was in the basement celebrating with his friends, cooking up some sausage and peppers that his daughter had brought over. They all went home around 11 o'clock, according to the FBI, and then the FBI left, pulled up their surveillance team from in front of the house, and that's when Sam Giancana was murdered. It's not known who came into the house at that point, but it's thought that the person came down the outside stairs from the driveway down into the basement and then shot Giancana at least a half dozen times with a pistol equipped with a silencer. The gun had been bought in Miami, Florida a few weeks earlier. The outfit apparently had sent in somebody to buy a couple of guns at that point. One was used on Giancana, one was used a few months later on a hoodlum from Milwaukee. It's not known at this point who was the trigger man in either of those cases, but Giancana's gun was found a couple of weeks after he was killed, tossed into a forest preserve not far from his house. Nobody heard Giancana shot because the gun had a silencer. Even the people who were living just 30 feet away from where it happened. They were living on the first floor, but because a silencer was used, Giancana fell to the ground and bled out, dead. The shooter went out the same way he came in, investigators thought, up those stairs and out the driveway door. Apparently, whoever did the shooting was driving away, may have seen a police officer or a police car and threw the gun out the window and into the forest preserve. It was found intact a couple of weeks later, and the ballistics testing showed that that was the gun that killed Sam Giancana. Interestingly, there were a number of people that were on a short list that the FBI and the Oak Park police had at the time, including the head of the Chicago mob, including Sam Giancana's longtime driver, a couple of the people who he had over that night for sausages and peppers in the basement, and nobody was ever arrested or charged. Some were taken before a grand jury and questioned, but nobody ever actually paid the price for Sam Giancana's murder. It's been 50 years. The authorities have still kept this case open. There's a file at the Oak Park Police Headquarters labeled Giancana that is filled with documents and photos. It's always been a mystery even what the crime scene looked like, but we've obtained photos from the Giancana crime file that show this basement apartment where he was attacked and shot and killed and where he fell to the ground. The frying pan is still on the stovetop of this basement kitchen. Giancana never let on to anybody that he had felt as though he was in danger or was threatened. The only thing we do know as a possible motive for Sam Giancana's murder is that he had been subpoenaed to testify before the Senate Intelligence Committee. And he was supposed to be in Washington, D.C. within the next couple of days. The thinking is that mob bosses came to Giancana and wanted to know what he planned to say to this Senate panel. Giancana was always known to be somebody who would speak his mind in public. They were concerned that Giancana was going to spill mob secrets to the Senate panel. The Senate hearing was about the mob's involvement with the CIA, and as an offshoot of that, whether the Chicago mob had anything to do with the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Even though it was years after the Kennedy assassination, there were still questions about whether the Chicago outfit had an active plot against JFK at the time he was killed. And the mob did not want Sam Giancana to go public with any mob secrets, especially the CIA involvement from those years, and attempting to kind of pave the way for the Chicago mob to continue casino operations in Havana with Fidel Castro taking charge. There were all sorts of questions swirling around the Giancana appearance in Washington, D.C., and mob bosses are thought to have shown up at his apartment in Oak Park that day in June of '75, asking him, "What do you plan to say?" By all appearances, they didn't like what they heard from Giancana, and that is, in the minds of most mob watchers, that's the reason that Giancana was killed. The big question is, who actually pulled the trigger? And nobody alive today would be held responsible for it. But federal authorities do believe in their own minds, based on all of the evidence that's out there, that they know who it was. They've been told by people who survived what happened back then, people who are still alive to this day, and there's some documentation as to who they believe killed Sam Giancana. Even to this day, 50 years later, there are a number of theories as to who may have killed Sam Giancana, and because nobody has ever been charged, nobody was ever indicted, and the thinking is that there is no shooter still alive, this is still a lot of guesswork by investigators. However, here are the people that initially and over the years authorities believe might have been involved in the murder of Sam Giancana. The number one suspect in most people's eyes, and the name that has played out over the years, is Dominic Blasi. This person was Sam Giancana's longtime bodyguard and driver, his most trusted ally by all accounts. But what that means is, in the world of the Chicago outfit, that is the person who can get closest to the target. Blasi very easily could have walked into that basement apartment that night, and Sam Giancana would have welcomed him in. They were on good terms. There was nothing that Giancana would have found suspicious about Don Blasi being there that night. So Blasi was the number one, and in some people's eyes is still the number one suspect, although he died many years ago and would never face justice even if it was determined that it was him. The number two suspect that has popped up over the years in the killing of Sam Giancana is a notorious name in the Chicago area, Anthony Spilotro. He ran Las Vegas for the Chicago outfit in the late 70s and into the early 80s. Spilotro was going off half-cocked in Las Vegas, and outfit bosses didn't like it. Spilotro also had a personal grudge against Sam Giancana, who was said to have been romantically involved with Spilotro's wife. Anthony Spilotro had quite a temper to begin with, and it's certainly conceivable that when he found out that the one-time overlord of the Chicago outfit, Sam Giancana, was involved with his wife, that he would go after Giancana. Anthony Spilotro is not somebody that Sam Giancana likely would have opened his front door to. He didn't particularly like Spilotro, according to what the stories were back then, and Spilotro didn't like him, mainly because of this belief that he was involved with his wife. But the other part of this is that Spilotro had his own problems in Las Vegas. He might not have been willing to fly to Chicago just to kill his neighbor. He only lived a mile or so from where the Spilotros had a house in the west suburbs. So Spilotro was a fringe possible suspect, but there are still some investigators who think that somebody like Anthony Spilotro, who was a little bit off of his rocker by most accounts, that he would have been somebody who would have gone in to kill Sam Giancana that night. So that leads us to the third and maybe the most unlikely suspect for the killing of Sam Giancana, mainly because this is a person who would have had to authorize anybody to kill Sam Giancana, but nobody ever thought he would actually pull the trigger himself because he didn't have to. That man is Anthony Joe Batters Accardo, the godfather of the Chicago mob. Somebody who had groomed Sam Giancana to take over for him in the 1970s. Anthony Accardo started his mob career as the driver for Al Capone, had spent decades running the Chicago mob. He didn't have to take a gun and pull the trigger to kill Giancana. He could have told any number of underlings to do it. However, mob insiders for years have said that Accardo was the guy who actually pulled the trigger. There are federal documents that show they have told federal investigators this. Perhaps the most convincing evidence, if you will, that Anthony Accardo was the actual killer of Sam Giancana is that's what federal prosecutors believe. Even though they didn't have enough evidence to charge Accardo when he was alive and haven't been willing to clear the case in his death, there is a thinking based on interviews with 4 top federal prosecutors that it was Anthony Accardo who did it, and that Accardo had the motive, the means, and that Giancana would have let him into the basement that night in June of '75. There is a belief that Anthony Accardo went to confront Sam Giancana that night in June of '75 about what Giancana planned to say to U.S. senators where he had been subpoenaed to testify in Washington, D.C. a few days later. Accardo was largely in charge of the Chicago outfit at that time, mainly because Giancana had gone haywire, had left for several years in Mexico, and had only recently returned. Between the two of them, they were the two most powerful men in Chicago organized crime. Tony Accardo went to ask Sam Giancana, what do you plan to tell the Senate committee? He obviously didn't like what he heard. He had the most to lose by whatever Giancana was going to tell U.S. senators. Anthony Accardo had some legal exposure in this. It's conceivable that he looked at Giancana as somebody who might be the conduit for Accardo, going to jail. And so Accardo had a personal motive to carry this out, and it may be that he didn't trust anybody else to do it. Killing Sam Giancana would take the approval of one person in Chicago organized crime, and that was Tony Accardo. Accardo may just have felt that, as in the old days when he would beat people over the head with a baseball bat until they were killed, he just would carry it out himself. Those are a lot of questions answered after 50 years. The authorities still don't have enough to charge anybody and never will. Sam Giancana's murder may be considered the outfit's last family secret. There may be other secrets out there that you know about. Let me know. I'm Chuck Gowdy, NBC5 Investigates.